Sewing of buttonholes and fixing buttons for the uniform shirt. We have almost completed sewing of the uniform shirt. Finally, we need to sew the buttonholes and fix the buttons to complete the uniform shirt. At the end of the session, you will be able to sew the buttonholes for the uniform shirt, fix the buttons for the uniform shirt, and check the quality of the finished product. Let's first familiarize with the tools and materials required for sewing of the buttonholes and fixing the buttons for the uniform shirt. They are uniform shirt piece, measuring tape, buttons, pins, seam ripper, matching thread, hand sewing needle, and small scissors. Now let's sew the buttonholes and fix the buttons for the uniform shirt. Here, one thing that we have to note down is that for a girl's shirt, the buttonholes have to be on the right-hand side shirt placket, and for a boy's shirt, the buttonholes have to be on the left-hand side shirt placket. Now to mark the first buttonhole, measure 1/4 inch down from the collar and center it in the middle of the placket. You can use pins to mark the positions. From the starting point of the first marking, measure 2.5 inches downward along the placket and make a mark for the next buttonhole. Repeat this till we mark the last buttonhole. Now measure the size of the button and mark the same on the placket using pins as shown here. Here the size of the button is 1/2 inch. After marking all the buttonholes, using a seam ripper, pierce the buttonhole along the markings made. Then sew all the buttonholes with a buttonhole stitch, which is also known as the blanket stitch. Buttonhole stitch can be either hand sewn or can be done using sewing machine by choosing the buttonhole stitch option. Not all machines have this option of sewing buttonholes, but some portable machine has. But in large-scale production units, there are separate sewing machines available only for sewing buttonholes or for fixing buttons. But here we are using hand stitches for sewing buttonholes and for fixing buttons. After sewing the buttonholes, we can mark the position of the buttons. For that, place the placket with the buttonholes over the other placket, aligning the collar and the bottom hem. To mark the first button's position, take a pin and pierce into the upper end of the buttonhole. This is to avoid sagging of the collar. Now for the rest of the buttons, except for the last one, mark the position in the middle of the buttonhole. And for the last one, mark the position at the bottom end of the buttonhole. Now remove the placket with the buttonholes. We might need to center the pins for marking at the placket. Now sew and fix all the buttons at the marked position. Now iron it nicely. Thus we have completed making a uniform shirt. Let's do a quality check to see if the product is made properly. Check the neatness of the stitched lines, reverse stitches, even and parallel seam allowances. Check if the corners at the collar are neat and both sides the same. Check if top stitches at collar are neat and even. Check if the full length is 16 inches. Check if the sleeve length is 5 inches. Check if the chest is 14.5 inches. Check if the pocket is placed parallel to the placket and at the height where the armhole begins. Check if the collar overlaps in the right way. Check if the placket is 3 by 4 inch evenly wide and the right and left side are of the same length starting from the collar till the bottom hem. Check if the bottom hem and sleeve hem are of ½ inch. Check if the hand stitches of the buttonholes are neat and even. Check if the buttons are neatly sewn without knots. In this session, we have learned how to sew the buttonholes and fix the buttons for the uniform shirt. Before we conclude, let's take a look at the key steps involved in sewing the buttonholes and fixing the buttons for the uniform shirt. They are: Step 1. Mark the position of the buttonholes on the right-hand side of the shirt placket. Step 2. Measure the size of the button and mark the same on the placket from the marked positions of the buttonholes. Step 3. Using a seam ripper, pierce the buttonhole along the markings made. Step 4. Sew the buttonholes using blanket stitch. Step 5. Mark the position of the buttons on the left-hand side of the shirt placket. Step 6. Sew and fix all the buttons at the marked position. Step 7. Iron the product neatly and do a quality check to ensure that the product made is of good quality. With that, we have come to the end of the session.